Welcome to the Grateful American Radio Show, hosted by author and publisher David Bruce Smith. What did George Washington do that you might not know about? What did Abe Lincoln know that could change the way you think about the Civil War? You'll learn about all that and more on this special show designed to restore excitement in American history. Let's get started. Hi, this is Hope Katz-Gibbs with the Grateful American Radio Show. My co-host, author and publisher David Bruce Smith, and I are here today with Angela Sontheimer, Managing Director of the Lincoln Leadership Institute at Gettysburg. As a little twist to our show, Angela will be interviewing David about his book, 3 Miles from Providence, The Tale of Abraham Lincoln and the Soldier's Home. We'll dive into that Q&A in just a moment, but first a little bit about her Lincoln Leadership Institute at Gettysburg. This is where Civil War history becomes a metaphor and the battlefield a classroom. In fact, leaders from some of the nation's largest corporations and government organizations have taken the Institute's 3-day training program because it's ideal for team building and leadership training, and it attracts anyone who finds themselves having to perform or produce in a stressful and rapidly changing environment with limited resources and limited information. In fact, as Angela will tell you, that is just the situation that the soldiers and commanders found themselves in during the Battle of Gettysburg. Founded by Stephen B. Wiley, an entrepreneur, author, and highly acclaimed speaker, his organization leads others toward unprecedented success by developing their leadership skills at all levels. So now let me turn the microphone over to Angela to interview David Bruce Smith about 3 Miles from Providence.
Thanks, Hope. Jared and I are excited to be here today. David, what was your inspiration to write about the Soldier's Home?
Well, it really wasn't an inspiration. It was a lucky break. I went to Springfield, Illinois with my parents and Dick Moe, who was then president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the fall of '06. To see Lincoln's, the Lincoln Library. And they were preparing for the re-inauguration of Lincoln Cottage in 2008. And I asked if they had anything to promote it. And they didn't. So I thought about it, and then I called my father the next morning, and I asked him if he thought, because he and my parents had been involved in Lincoln Cottage. He and my mother had been involved in Lincoln Cottage. I asked him if he thought they would be interested in a book. So he suggested I call them, and I did, and they were, and that's how it happened.
Great. So I'm interested, your book isn't written in traditional prose form. Why did you choose the style that you did and the beautiful non-traditional binding?
Okay, while I was at the Lincoln Library in Springfield, this is what they told me. More has been written about Lincoln than any person in the history of the world other than Christ. So that meant 25,000 to 30,000 books had been written then. So I had to figure out, well, you can't change the facts, but you can change how you present the facts. So I tried to figure out how I could present the material in a slightly different way. So that's how I came up with the diary format and the 8 generations, and it goes from the 1840s to 2007, and the language changes as it evolved. And with each generation, the font changes. So that's how the reader knows that there's been a change in that.
And what about the presentation and the binding?
Oh, the presentation. Well, I knew there were 2 ways to do this. Either I could do a standard book, a very rectangular book. I thought that would be boring, and I didn't want to give them that option. So I went online to see if soldiers carried anything. And most of the soldiers carried pouches that folded in, and then there was a leather string that wrapped around, and then there was the U.S. stamp on it. So that's what I used as my model for the design, and it's also a tactile experience. So before you actually open the book, you touch the leather and it has some effect, and the paper was sort of period paper, and the all the fonts were period, because I go all the way up to actually to email. So all that is meant to cue you visually and hopefully psychologically to enjoy it more.
Great. Can you tell us a little about the research that you did before setting pen to paper or finger to?
Okay. I had not much time. I had 6 months. So when I started looking at Lincoln on Amazon, you could scroll down forever. I mean, I didn't know what to do. So I called Lincoln Cottage and I asked them if they could just give me an idea of how to start this. So they gave me some recommendations. I got those books. And then I sort of went off on my own. And so I researched it for 4 months. And I had less than 2 months to write it, which it's probably the only thing I've ever done that I couldn't duplicate, because it was some kind of Zen state of mind, I suppose. I mean, I could never do it again.
Yeah, that's a very fast turnaround.
Yeah.
What's your favorite memory of the Soldier's Home?
2. One is when I was preparing, when I was trying to figure out how to do this. I was walking the grounds with Erin Carlson Mast. She's now the director. She was then doing the renovation, and she was taking me around. And there is something that happens every time I'm there, and I think for a lot of people, there is a very strong presence of Lincoln. And when you see what he saw, like the cemetery, he saw guys being put in the ground every week. And you imagine him watching that from the cottage, or quoting Shakespeare from to whoever his visitor is, or meeting people in the middle of the night in his pajamas. You know, he's very human. So that made it easier to do it, because his presence was in my mind. It wouldn't be like, Millard Fillmore or James Garfield, who they don't really mean anything. The other thing was, after the cottage opened, after it was re-inaugurated, my parents gave a Civil War dinner. So and it was in the area that Lincoln actually ate, and it was Civil War food, like hardtack and that kind of stuff. So it was really like being transported back 150 years.
That sounds like quite an experience.
It was.
So what are some of the lessons that you think we can learn from Lincoln?
Well, I think if it weren't for Lincoln, civil rights would not have happened until much later. Because if he hadn't freed the slaves, it wouldn't have been Andrew Johnson, and it wouldn't have been Grant, and it wouldn't have been Hayes, and it wouldn't have been Garfield. I don't know who it would have been. He jump-started human rights. And I think that he is, more than any person in history, probably, where, somebody like Washington is admired, but he's beloved. And I think he is memorable forever.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. So can you tell us about some of the other projects that you're currently working on?
Yes. My co-host Hope Katz Gibbs and I are working on the Grateful American series, which is a radio show with the intent of restoring enthusiasm in American history for kids and adults. Now, this came about for a lot of reasons. One, my father always referred to himself as a grateful American. So, from my end, it was a sentiment that becomes now a noun. But the other thing was, I learned that the American Revolution Center, which is building a museum in Philadelphia dedicated solely to the Revolution, and there isn't such a thing, which was a big surprise to me. They did a survey in 2011, and that survey said that 89% of Americans believe that the Revolutionary War took place after the Civil War. This was not a good statistic.
No.
Not at all. So that propelled me to do my part of the Grateful American series. So what we have been doing, Hope and I, is visiting the presidential homes, Monticello, Montpelier, Lincoln Cottage, the Grange, Alexander Hamilton's home in New York, and others, and talking to the heads of them about what it is about history that excites them, what it is about their presidential home that excites them, and how history can be taught in ways to stimulate kids. Because this is when you get a statistic like that, 89% of Americans thinking, the Revolutionary War came after the Civil War, it's a multi-generational problem.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So if you could just accomplish one thing with the Grateful American series, what would it be?
Oh, make history fun. I had a teacher in 12th grade who said, just remember this. History is like a long gossip session. It is his story.
That's a very cool way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So, in addition to the Grateful American series, what are some solutions for getting kids and adults more excited about knowing our history and reigniting our passion for the people who founded the country?
Well, besides getting teachers who are more qualified, textbooks for the most part, are really abstruse. And when I used to read my daughter's history textbook, I didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, it was so boring. The other thing that I don't understand is why, I know that schools have lots of financial issues and that kind of thing. But if local businesses could invest money in innovative programs like more field trips, more things that are primary source materials for kids, if they can invest money knowing that the kids they're putting money into are going to be their future employees, I think, it would help things along.
Those are all great solutions. Who's your favorite president?
Lincoln.
Do you have a second?
Truman.
Why?
Well, Truman recognized the state of Israel.
I didn't know that. Interesting. So, in the series, you've been traveling to all these fantastic presidential homes. Can you speak a little bit about some of the favorite things of a couple of those homes?
Lincoln Cottage, for one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because Lincoln Cottage is very compact. It's 2 acres, and the experience is very concentrated.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the other homes it's more diffused. I mean, You can do Lincoln Cottage in an hour. That's one kind of experience. I love Mount Vernon. I love Montpelier. I love Monticello, but those are it's a long day. So, and I mean, it is what it is. But there is the veranda at Mount Vernon, and you're looking out at the Potomac, knowing that George Washington and Martha probably sat out there and did the same thing. Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. Oh, the books in the library. There's a new library at Mount Vernon called the Fred W. Smith Library, and his books, George Washington's books, are sort of hidden away, but we have the opportunity to actually handle them.
Wow.
And when you see his notes from the Constitutional Congress, that's a pretty cool thing. Mm-hmm. They've also done some really really up-to-date restoration at Mount Vernon. As they do this restoration each, however many times, 10 or 20 years, it gets more and more accurate because they find more and more things that are, close to the original. I think the Grange in New York, Alexander Hamilton's house, which was supposed to be his version of Mount Vernon. That's a pretty concentrated experience too. That was a really, I felt his presence actually there too. That was really, because it's. I mean, even though it's been moved 3 times, it's still within the 33 acres that he owned.
Well, it's not exactly a presidential home, but the Wills House, where Lincoln spent the night before he gave the Gettysburg Address, is where our offices are, and we hope that you'll come visit us there sometime. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Grateful American Radio Show, hosted by author and publisher David Bruce Smith. Here's to restoring enthusiasm in history for kids and adults too.